In this video, we are going to take a look at what is involved from a platform engineering perspective to manage EKS clusters and to securely provide access to those clusters to end users and development teams. We'll do that first using AWS and then see how Tanzu simplifies it. Let's first start looking at what's involved when creating an EKS cluster using native AWS commands and processes. Now, to begin with, we'll start creating the control plane of an EKS cluster by providing a name in our AWS console, giving it the number of nodes, the VPCs, and the region with the Kubernetes version to create this cluster. Keeping in mind that when an AWS EKS cluster is created, it's only going to create control plane nodes and not worker nodes. So we're going to create the EKS clusters. This is going to take some time. You'll notice that there are no worker nodes. We need to create a worker node. So in order to do that, we have to go back to the cluster, start creating worker nodes. Now, even if before we do that, we have to create an IAM role for those worker nodes. So we are going to go into the IAM section of AWS, assign specific EKS worker node policies, and create that IAM role. So here I am creating those roles for the worker nodes. Once I have created that, I can select that, go back to my worker node creation, and then select that policy and create those worker nodes. I can give the number of nodes I want, auto scaling capabilities, etc. at this point in the EKS cluster creation process. I'm going to review everything and then finally create the cluster. So now we have a cluster with worker nodes and control plane nodes. Then I'm going to fetch the kubeconfig file for this cluster so that I can actually create role-based access controls for the dev teams that I'm going to provide access to this cluster. For that, I'm going to first fetch the kubeconfig file for that cluster itself, and then I'm going to create some cluster role bindings that I can map to the IAM roles for the developers. So I have fetched the kubeconfig, and then I'll be applying the cluster role YAML files for a read-only account. So those are the cluster role. So I'm going to apply it to the same cluster. Then I'm going to update the AWS config file to map these to the IAM roles within AWS. And then finally, I can hand over this cluster to my dev teams. Now let's take a look at how to do the same thing within VMware Tanzu. I'm in Tanzu Mission Control where I can actually start creating EKS clusters. I've added my EKS cluster credentials, and I'm just going to select an EKS cluster to create. I'm going to give the cluster a name, a region, the number of worker nodes, etc. And I can provide all of this information a single shot within Tanzu. And then Tanzu Mission Control is then going to automate everything for me, including adding the worker nodes, scalability, automation, everything that's needed. So at the end of this process, I'll get a cluster that has worker nodes and control plane nodes all created all together at once. So you'll see that the cluster is being created right now. We can go back and check the status of this within Tanzu Mission Control as well, and it will start detecting once a cluster, as the worker nodes start coming up, it will detect everything. So the cluster has been created, and as you can see, everything, including worker nodes, CNI, everything has been already deployed via Tanzu Mission Control. Now back in Tanzu Mission Control, I'm going to provide users access to this cluster. So I'm going to go into access policies. And I can do this at a cluster level or at a cluster group level. And I'm going to locate my cluster and add my IAM user to this particular cluster as a cluster admin. I can define other RBAC roles that are already defined within Tanzu Mission Control. I can even add a service account. I'll click Next, and this will add the user to that particular EKS account. And that's it. As a developer, now I'm logging in. I get self-service access to Tanzu mission control. I can fetch my kube config, and everything from the IAM and RBAC roles have already been automated for me through Tanzu mission control. And that's it. Now let's recap. Creating and managing EKS clusters through AWS Mint. I had to create the worker nodes, the cluster control plane, the IAM roles, configure kubectl, access, RBAC, everything else, and then hand over that cluster to the development team. With Tanzu, all I had to do was create clusters, add users, and the user login through a self-service fashion. Also, you have to do this for every cluster that gets created within AWS, whereas with Tanzu, you can define roles and access policies once and they get applied to every cluster that gets created. And also, everything from the cluster provisioning perspective is already automated. Thank you.